Hello everybody and welcome back to another Marvel Crisis Protocol Character Spotlight. And for this week's Character Spotlight, we're taking a look at Arnim Zola, a model that, in my opinion, is a little underplayed, although for somewhat understandable reasons. So starting things out, we're going to take a look at his defensive stats, and things get interesting here right away, coming in with a 2 physical defense, which is really rough right out the gate for him here, but his other defenses are alright. He's got a 3 energy and a 4 mystic, which is pretty good, and he's got 6 stamina to help make up for that on a 3 threat. So yeah, definitely an interesting line here. He's got a little bit more health than your average 3, but that 2 physical is definitely hurting him a bunch. He's going to be a size 3 and a short mover, although he is on a medium base, so the short move doesn't feel too bad. So yeah, already kind of off to an interesting start here. Moving into his attacks, his first one is pretty unique. It is Prototype Weapons. That's going to be a range 4 dice attack. That says it's physical, but it also says before choosing a target, you can choose whether it is physical, energy, or mystic. So you've got your pick of the crop there. You can have whatever you would like, which is definitely nice for, being only a 4 dice attack. Being able to put it on your opponent's weakest side is definitely going to feel a lot better in a lot of different cases. So already off to a pretty decent start with this attack. It is a gainer attack, so you're only going to gain 1 power no matter how the attack rolls out, and that's definitely a nice thing again with a 4 dice attack. You're not always going to be able to do damage, especially if it's against a bulkier model, so having that kind of consistency is certainly nice. And then lastly, he's got the wild Hydra Ingenuity. After the attack is resolved for each wild in the attack roll, the defending character gains one of the following conditions, and those conditions can be bleed, shock, slow, or stun, all of which are pretty meaningful conditions. I mean, a lot of the time in the early game, you're probably looking at stuff like shock or stun being really good. On a 4 dicer attack too, if you're able to throw out a stun without doing too much damage to them, that actually feels really good against some characters. So yeah, that's a solid set of conditions to be able to throw out, and in theory, if you roll a couple wilds in that attack roll, you can throw out more than one, which definitely feels pretty good. From there, we have his spender, which is going to be the Focused ESP Box Blast. This is going to be a 2-cost spender. It's going to be range 3 and throw 6 dice on the energy side. If this attack deals damage after the attack is resolved, this character may advance the target character small, and that's on damage, so on a 6 dicer, pretty decent odds you can do that. And it's also got a wild slow here. After the attack is resolved, the target character gains the slow special condition. And yeah, I mean, that's solid, being able to hand out another form of slow, because you already kind of have that on your prototype weapons. But yeah, I mean, slow is a good condition, can definitely be really meaningful on the right character. The next ability on his card here is Experimental Enhancements. This is going to be a 3-cost superpower that says during the next attack made by this character this turn, add 2 dice to its attack roll. After the attack is resolved, if the attack roll contains any skull results, this character suffers 1 damage. And yeah, this is really nice if you really need the consistency on being able to make the opposing character walk with your spender here, or you just want to kind of fish for more wilds for your Hydra Ingenuity here on your gainer. This is a great way of doing that. Being able to add 2 dice makes, 6 dice, range 4, choose your type gainers are really solid. Of course, they are costing you 3 power still, but yeah, that's still quite effective. And, 8 dice on the spender here is going to pretty consistently do at least 1 damage. So you'll be able to get that walk trigger fairly frequently. So yeah, definitely a solid superpower. Probably a little overcosted considering the downside that it has on it, but still pretty useful. The next superpower on his card here is Hydra Engineering. This is an X-cost reactive superpower. While this character or another allied character within range 4 of this character is attacking or defending, during the modified dice step of the attack, this character may spend up to 3 power to use this superpower. For each power spent, this character or the allied character may reroll 1 of their attack or defense dice. After the attack is resolved, if the allied roll contained 1 or more skull results, the allied character gains the bleed special condition. So you can potentially make your allies, you can't make yourself bleed, but you can potentially make your allies bleed for this, but you can roll up to 3 dice for 1 power per roll, and that's kind of the standard going rate. So yeah, that's definitely pretty useful here. Can help him push through damage on his own spender, which is certainly nice, and again, he doesn't really benefit or suffer the effects of the downside himself. And yeah, just kind of, Hydra's Shuri at home, I suppose. But he can do it to himself, which is definitely meaningful, and makes that 2 physical defense not quite as bad as it usually would be. So that definitely helps out there as well. Next thing on his card here, he has Scientific Hubris. Whenever this character rolls dice after the effect is resolved, it gains 1 power if it rolled at least 1 critical. This is definitely going to help him keep up on his power here, considering the fact that he has a lot of things that he wants to spend tons of power for, but the only way he can gain is through this gainer here. So if you're rolling any criticals, it's definitely going to feel a lot better. That also makes experimental enhancements feel a little bit better as well, because if you're spending 3 to add 2 dice, but then you end up rolling a critical, you end up really only spending 1 at the end of the day, and that feels pretty good. So yeah, that definitely helps a lot. You could also re-roll into it or something like that as well, so it can kind of make up for a few different things in a few different ways, which is definitely nice for him to have, because otherwise he is quite power hungry, and I think at the end of the day that's probably his biggest downside just in general, is he's pretty power hungry, and his power generation is pretty slow even with Scientific Hubris here. Lastly, he's got immunity to a couple conditions here, those being bleed and poison. Both relatively nice conditions to be immune to. They're not necessarily backbreaking conditions in most scenarios, but the bleed is especially nice seeing as he gives bleed to himself when he uses his rerolls, so being able to just not care about that is certainly nice. With that out of the way, we're going to take a look at his flip side real quick, and we're going to see that absolutely nothing changes for him. So yeah, here we have a kind of interesting character. He's got like a bit of a Shuri style thing going on with Hydra Engineering, but he doesn't quite have the power consistency to make crazy good use of it. If you want him to kind of just sit back and be a Hydra Engineering piece, then he might occasionally throw out a condition, but otherwise he's really not doing much. You're not going to be doing too much damage with these, so you definitely want to be throwing in experimental enhancements where you can to try and get some extra damage in. The spender is quite nice. It's only a 2 cost, and for 6 dice, being able to advance the target character is definitely nice. That's a displacement that doesn't care about the size of the target, so that's very much appreciated for a low threat character. So that's definitely a good thing that he can do, and then advancing them away and giving them slow is also kind of a rude combination. The big things you got to kind of watch out for him are going to be that he is really low on power. Even with Scientific Hubris, he often doesn't have enough to do everything he wants to do, so you're going to have to keep that in mind. He's relatively slow, so if he gets displaced, it also doesn't feel amazing for him because he does just have to walk to get back to where he wants to go. And then the last thing just being that physical defense. Characters that are attacking on the physical side are already pretty common, but then you also have to worry about throws and things like that. So you definitely got some things to kind of keep an eye out for with him. But he does do some pretty solid things when he gets to kind of do his thing. Hydra Engineering is a great reroll ability. I mean, it is kind of just worse than a lot of other characters like Shuri's, but it working on both attack and defense and being able to use it on himself definitely helps a lot with that. And experimental enhancements can make him hit like a bit of a truck. When he wakes up on his flip side with a bunch of power from going down, he's going to be able to do this and potentially do a lot of damage. If you do maybe two 8-dicers, for example, that's probably pretty expensive, but like an 8 dice followed by a 6 dicer or something like that could be really, really nice. So yeah, he's definitely got some big things he can do, but he's got some very obvious downsides that we'll talk about some of the affiliations and some of his own affiliations that can kind of help get around some of that. Before we move on to that, though, we do have a couple team tactics cards to talk about here. The first one being Scientific Method. And Scientific Method here is a Hydra-affiliated tactics card that says he can spend 2 power to play this card. He's going to choose another allied character, threat value 3 or less within range 3 of himself. The chosen character suffers 2 damage, and for the rest of the game, they may use the ESP leakage attack and gains the unnatural mutation superpower. So the superpower here says when an enemy character targets this character with an attack, this character adds 2 dice to its defense roll unless the attacking character pays 2. So that's a really, really solid piece of defensive tech right there. He can kind of throw out onto one of his allies. Cool. And then from there, it also gives them the ESP leakage attack. This is a range 2 6 dice mystic attack that's going to cost you 1 power. And before damage is dealt, the target character suffers 1 damage for each skull in the defense roll. So yeah, this is a really, really cool card, and I think there's definitely some really interesting characters you can play it on. Personally, I really, really enjoy it on Hood. I don't know why, I just seem to play this card on Hood all the time, and being able to give him that kind of unnatural mutation makes him really, really obnoxious to go into. That said, he really doesn't like taking the 2 damage. You want to play it on him pretty early in the game to really get the good mileage out of it. Some characters that are more okay with taking the 2 damage would be stuff like X-23 is really, really interesting with this, giving her access to a mystic attack with a reroll as well. certainly quite nice, making it a little bit more annoying to take her down. And then she has healing factor to just not care about the 2 damage is also really, really cool. So yeah, it's definitely one of those cards you definitely want to have a bit of a plan when you bring the card, but it's kind of cool. It gives you a really, really nice kind of annoying piece of defensive tech that's going to make your opponent not want to target that character most of the game, and a pretty solid attack, especially if you don't already have a mystic attack. So yeah, I think it's a really, really cool card, but definitely one you want to have a plan on who you're using it with. And again, keep in mind that it's going to cost Zola 2 power, so you definitely don't want to be, playing this on a turn where Zola needs all of his power for rerolls and stuff like that as well. The other card here is going to be the High Council, and this is kind of a combination card with a bunch of characters, where if they're old, meaning different conditions, you can bring in an extra character, threat value 4 or less, and Zola's condition is just contesting a secure objective token, which works pretty well for him because that's kind of what he likes to do. He likes to sit on like a kind of back point and just pew away with his range 4 attack, so that kind of works out for him. As for affiliations, he's only a member of 2 affiliations here, those being Cabal and Hydra. There's going to be a lot of overlap, so I'll try to avoid talking about the same characters more than once, but we'll go ahead and start out by looking at Cabal here. And for the leaderships for Cabal, we have Malekith the Accursed, who is based around dazing or KOing enemy characters, and then having other models in your team remove damage, gain power, and advance. And while Zola isn't necessarily the best for getting the dazes himself, he does really, really appreciate this leadership when it can be used on him, and being able to give him that extra power can help with your rerolls to help trigger that leadership more often. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting leadership for him. Him being only a 3 threat, he can kind of sit on a back point for you, pew once in a while, do some damage, maybe some conditions here and there, and then give you those rerolls on, like Malekith himself, for example, to really try and capitalize and make sure you can take out those models when you need them. And of course, the small advance is definitely nice for him as well, just kind of being able to keep him in a relevant position if he gets controlled at all or anything like that. And because he's got a decent stamina pool, being able to remove a damage is all right for him as well, although his defensive tech leaves a little to be desired, so that doesn't always feel amazing. But still can't hurt if you're selecting him anyways. The main things he's going to get out of it are going to be the power and movement anyways. The next one here is probably his favorite leadership, and that is Original Red Skull from Cabal, I should specify. And this is anytime you damage an enemy character with an attack, after the attack is resolved, you gain 1 power. And this works really, really nicely with his own experimental enhancements here, where you pay 3 power to add 2 dice. Then, if you end up rolling a critical in that attack and you do a damage, you've gained all 3 power back, which feels pretty good. Or if you do it on the spender, you've gained 2 power back, and that's not bad either. So yeah, I think that's probably one of his favorites, just because it's a power focused leadership, and he is going to be able to double tap most turns. And even though it's not the most consistent thing in the world, just being a 4-dicer, because you can pick your opponent's weak side with his basic gainer attack, there's a good chance you'll do at least 1 damage on average with that as well. So yeah, just in general, it feels pretty solid for that. But yeah, that's kind of the main thing he's getting out of Red Skull here. And then I guess just giving dice consistency, it turns out, is pretty good in general. So yeah, and that's kind of the main moral of the story with him in Cabal in general, is he gives dice consistency, and dice consistency is really, really good. Speaking of dice consistency, the next leadership we're going to look at is Red Skull 3. And yeah, this is a solid leadership for basically anyone. I think it's a little bit awkward on him because he is a little bit power starved most of the time, because he does potentially lose power to be using the leadership here, but because he's treating a skull as a critical, then he's also gaining a power, so it kind of goes net neutral for him and really just ends up being a way for him to more consistently do damage. So that definitely helps him with his spender. I mean, that's certainly a nice part for him. But yeah, I don't think it's necessarily the most insane leadership for him, but I don't think it's bad either. It's just kind of pretty neutral. As for the rest of the affiliation, I think he synergizes pretty well with a couple of models. He can be great in combination with Killmonger to really just secure that usurp turn for you, giving you a bunch of rerolls feels really, really good. So I definitely like him there. Pairing him with Zemo and Strucker, kind of creating some cool reroll bubbles, can also be really, really nice. So those two work pretty interestingly with him. Mordo kind of competes with him for that support role, although in theory running them together could be kind of cool. Having Mordo be able to buff his attacks could be quite nice for him. But then, of course, he's potentially taking damage for that, so you gotta be somewhat careful with how you're doing that, because he also hurts himself with his own attack buff. So even though you can go kind of crazy with that and start start hitting, like 8 dice gainers and stuff like that if you really want to, you're going to be eating some of that damage back. So things to keep in mind. But yeah, he's got some cool synergies here, and he is one of the only models in the affiliation that kind of does his thing of just being a sort of reroll bubble model. Obviously, Zemo and Strucker do that as well, but they're on a much smaller scale. So yeah, he fills a kind of unique role, and if you're looking for some more consistency, he's definitely a great affiliated option for that sort of thing. Moving on to Hydra, where we're going to see kind of very similar things in terms of other models with such like Zemo and Strucker. He fills a very, very similar role here that he does in Cabal, but we have a couple different leaderships to talk about. The first one being Zemo, and Zemo's leadership I don't think he particularly cares for. I mean, it being Hydra does kind of open you up to bring his card more, so that's certainly interesting. But I think a lot of the time it's kind of worth considering bringing the card anyways with him here. So yeah, it's one of those. It definitely makes it easier, but I don't think he cares too much about it. Gaining the power back is certainly nice. Being able to effectively play it for one is quite nice, so that's a thing. From there, we have Strucker's leadership, and I think he's pretty good under Strucker. Just being able to throw out so many conditions on his attacks there potentially gives him a lot of play in a kind of Strucker condition sort of list. The healing isn't anything particularly insane for him because he doesn't have great defensive tech, but, it can't hurt, and just kind of being able to throw out more conditions is kind of the name of the game with Strucker. So, yeah, he feels pretty solid here, nothing too crazy. Not super affected by Death Spore virus, so that's also a plus, I guess. Being immune to poison definitely helps out for stuff like that as well. As far as benefiting from the leaderships go, I think his favorite, though, is going to be Red Skull, Master of Hydra here, where he just gets extra power if he's sitting on objectives, and that's kind of what he wants to do, as we mentioned earlier. He likes to just kind of sit in a back point and pew away, so while he's doing that, if he's gaining extra power, is going to feel really good for him, giving, more rerolls, more dice buffs, and those sorts of things. So, yeah, Red Skull probably his favorite leader of the group here, but honestly, I think he plays fine under all three of them, and he works really well as a solid support model in Hydra. So I definitely like him in affiliation a fair bit. Taking a look at other affiliations, I think he's a solid option if you're looking to splash someone who can kind of give that dice consistency to the rest of your team. So that's kind of the main thing I'm looking at, is ways to make that a little bit more consistent for him. Specifically, most of the time going to be through kind of power-oriented leaderships. Something like Inhumans could be kind of interesting, where they already have a single reroll themselves, but at least until this new box comes out, I don't think they have much in the way of giving other models rerolls, so that could be solid for them. He kind of sit back and just throw out some rerolls here and there for the team. He's competing a little bit for the support role with Lockjaw there, of course, but they're doing very different things, so depending on the type of scenario you're playing on, could be very interesting just being able to power him up there. In a similar vein, you have something like A-Force, where you could throw power at him all day long, and he can use that power to either help keep She-Hulk alive, help She-Hulk punch harder, or just really anyone on your team. Of course, the biggest problem here being that he's competing with Shuri, who does very similar things without some of the downsides that he comes with. So not really his ideal home, but in a world where Shuri isn't affiliated, or maybe you want to double up on those sorts of effects, could potentially be really interesting. A couple other potentially interesting places, some of the more open leaderships, such as Dark Dimension or Emma's affiliation here. I just realized the leadership isn't going to come up on the card here, but being able to just kind of throw some extra power on him through either of those leaderships definitely feels nice, and the healing doesn't hurt under Emma either, so you've definitely got a couple of solid options there. I think he works pretty well under most power leaderships, but those two are definitely ones he appreciates. But yeah, I think that just about does it for my thoughts on Mr. Zola here. In general, I think he's basically Shuri at home for Hydra and Cabal, but he kind of does some things that Shuri doesn't, such as being able to kind of make himself hit hard if he wants to as well, because that's something that Shuri definitely, like, she's a great control piece and she's a great support piece, but she doesn't really have the ability to hit super hard unless they come in close for a spender. So him having the ability to enhance his own dice and then reroll his own dice definitely helps out with that, and kind of gives him that little bit of extra versatility there at the cost of having downsides to his modifiers and his own dice buff there. So he's got to be somewhat careful with him, but he's definitely an interesting model. He's got some cool support abilities that might be a little bit overcosted, specifically the experimental enhancements here, but he has some great attacks. He's got the ability to throw out a bunch of meaningful conditions on his basic gainer here, and his spender having a bow attached to it is pretty good. So yeah, he's definitely one of those models that I think a lot of people see the too physical and get kind of scared away from him, which is totally understandable, but he does still have 12 stamina between his two sides, and with those rerolls, the 2 dice isn't quite as bad as it would be on a model that didn't have those, so that definitely helps make up for it as well. But yeah, I think that just about covers my thoughts on Mr. Zola here. So I hope you guys have enjoyed. If you did, please do drop a like down below. Subscribe if you're new to the channel. Helps me out a bunch. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the stuff I'm throwing out here. And definitely also leave a comment if you guys have any thoughts on Zola here. Anywhere you guys like to include him that I didn't talk about in this video. Any synergies with specific models or anything like that. Always curious to hear what you guys think. But that's going to do it for my portion of this. So until next time, have a great day, everybody. Peace.